This was Russian Sabre-Rattling. NATO is on high alert, but really it goes back to the pictures themselves. You know, this aged Tupolev 160 that might be the biggest military aircraft ever made, but it's pretty old, it's pretty slow, and when you see it up against fifth generation fighters like the F-35, you know, you sort of know this is a bit of a joke. Hamish De Bretton-Gordon, former British Army officer and military analyst, and author of Tank Command.
So, Hamish, why is Putin staging nuclear war games right off the north of Britain at this exact moment?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons, and it is part of what Russia has always done, these sort of nuclear drills. But I think it's more acute now, and we're seeing it more now than perhaps we have before the Ukraine war. Putin and his spokespeople and propagandists in Moscow are trying to paint a picture at the moment that NATO is the aggressor. NATO is rearming to attack Russia. Of course, completely forgetting that it was, of course, Russia who invaded Crimea in 2014, Russia who had a full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. But I think as things start to go badly, the Russian hierarchy are trying to convince the Russian rank and file that it's NATO that are the problem here. And these drills are just that. You know, the fact that the video that people will be seeing on the internet at the moment is Russia Today, which is basically Putin's mouthpiece, his sort of TV channel, you know, all quite detailed, and everything else is very much, I think, to show the Russian people that, you know, we're still on this, we can still hold NATO at bay. But really it goes back to the pictures themselves. You know, this aged Tupolev 160 that might be the biggest military aircraft ever made, but it's pretty old, it's pretty slow, and when you see it up against fifth generation fighters like the F-35, you know, you sort of know this is a bit of a joke. But it can carry nuclear, it is nuclear capable, you know, carry up to 45 tons of weaponry, but one knows how easily it could be taken out by an F-35, and it certainly couldn't, although it was guarded, we understand, with MiG-31s, but again, you know, nobody thinks a MiG-31 is any match for a F-35.
How aggressive was the flight profile compared to what we normally see with these nuclear drills?
We know that very often Russian bombers, usually the Bear, the big four-engined propeller thing that we see sort of flying off the coast of Scotland every now and again. The Tupolev is, you know, is a slightly different sort of indicator, again protected, and the fact that the Russians are making such a big thing of it, you know, flying north of Scotland off the coast of Norway, not unusual. Russia is trying to put this narrative, particularly against Britain, and particularly sort of this threat of some sort of nuclear type capability. But I think it's really part of the story that the Russians are trying to paint at the moment. They're seeing Europe rearming massively. You know, Germans spending 200 billion. I mean, admittedly, the UK are rather letting the NATO side down at the moment. They're seeing the Estonians rearming, lots of exercise in the Baltic states. So, you know, it makes the Russian military look very, very second rate. And the only gold card that Putin really still has is his tactical nuclear capability. But again, that capability is only as good as the ability to use it. And I don't think, you know, an aging, old, big, heavy jet just strikes me as, you know, no way is that going to be guaranteed to be able to fire its missiles if it really wanted to. Because these things are indicators. And I'm sure if the Norwegian F-35s or even British F-35s thought that this thing was about to fire, it'd be knocked out of the sky. And, you know, there's no way that I think it is a genuine nuclear threat that we should be concerned about. You know, missiles, drones, certainly, but old fighters, I think they are yesterday's story, and we just need to look at what's been successful in Ukraine with unmanned drones. You know, some of them pretty big, rather than some old jet belching out sort of aviation fuel over the North Atlantic.
If a Russian pilot miscalculates or crosses into sovereign airspace during one of these drills, How fast does this spiral into a direct NATO-Russia conflict? Just how jumpy is NATO at the minute?
Well, I think people need to be reassured. I mean, this has been going on for an awfully long time. And both the Russians and ourselves, I hate to say it's a game, but know the rules. So I think it would be, we get occasional incursions into airspace. I mean, with modern technology, with GPS. I mean, in the olden days when people were relying on inertial navigation systems, that there was a bit more leeway. But now, absolutely not. I mean, people might remember back sort of 10 years ago when a Russian jet sprayed into Turkish airspace during the Syrian war. I was in Syria at the time, and the Turks shot it down. Turkey is a NATO country, of course. So I think both sides know the rules here. And so I think any incursion, immediately the plane wouldn't be shot down. But there is precedence here. And, the last thing the Russians want is one of their prized nuclear jets being shot out of the sky, sort of by accident because somebody's gone wrong. And I suppose the final thing to say on this, one jet with a tactical nuclear weapon, doesn't really change the situation at all. If there were 10 jets flying around NATO airspace with nuclear weapons on, yeah, we might be a bit concerned. But I think one is just the Russians sabre-rattling as they always do, and the fact that it's been shepherded by Norwegian Air Force F-35s should reassure people that NATO is, I wouldn't say jumpy, but it's on the balls of their feet, and all NATO countries have jets ready to interdict and turn these people around, which seems to happen 99% of the time.
We saw the UK take a Shadow Fleet tanker, the Smitros, and subsequently we saw shots fired, warning shots at a retired couple in the Channel. And now we've got this nuclear drill. Is this the message from Russia? And what is the UK going to do about Shadow Fleet tankers moving forward? Now we're looking at potentially Andy Burnham taking control. Will the UK back off?
No, I hope not. I mean, this is this is part of the hybrid war that we've been in with Russia for some time. I think it was last year the head of MI6 reiterated that we are in a hybrid war. The Russians are cyber attacking us all the time. They're doing espionage operations. Only last week we understand that some Russian agents try to firebomb some of Keir Starmer's properties. That is how Russia does business. Now, the Shadow Fleet thing is a huge issue because we know that Ukraine has so damaged Russia's oil-producing capability, which keeps the Russian war machine going. And sanctions mean that people can't buy Russian oil, but the Shadow Fleet stuff is really Putin's lifeline. It's keeping his military going. And it was the French a couple of weeks ago who took over a tanker, and then ourselves last week. This is really damaging. An awful lot of those shadow tankers have been filled up in the north of Russia. Traditionally have come through the English Channel, which is pretty brazen, pretty reckless, or have gone out to the Atlantic. So, for Putin, this is really bad news. Now, I don't think we should take too much store on the shots fired, which is, sort of what, the rules of the sea say from, warship. I expect a British warship, it would do the same if it was in a similar situation and there was a Russian boat involved. So, but it just reiterates the position that we're in. I think it also reiterates how desperate, Putin is going. His conventional war after, 4.5 years of a 3-day operation is a disaster. And people in Russia for the first time are realizing that. Now, he is trying to project power in every way he can. Nuclear drills, in the North Atlantic, espionage in the UK and across Europe. So I think this is just what we've got to expect. when it comes to Britain itself, let's hope if Andy Burnham is the new Prime Minister, he stops all this dilly-dallying around and messing around with the defence budget and the defence investment plan, and make sure that the money is available, because it is quite clear that part of the reason we're in this pickle with the Russians is that we've so neglected our defence capabilities that Putin doesn't take us seriously anymore. And it's absolutely key that we do fund the strategic defence review, because then we will have a conventional deterrence that Putin will be concerned about. At the moment, he feels that he can push us because, we have neglected our defence. So there's an awful lot going on at the moment. But there are so many old adages, to prevent war, you've got to prepare for it. And that is what we haven't done. And that's what we absolutely must do now. And the money to fund the defence investment plan is absolutely essential, not just so that we have the capability, but also to show Putin that we're serious about this.